chapter 3. Chapter 3 of Gulliver's Travels Part 2, that is A Voyage to Brobdingnag. So as I was discussing before, this situation is completely opposite. In Part 2, Gulliver is in a completely different situation, completely opposite situation. Okay, many of the issues that are brought up again here in this part is quite the same, but Gulliver is in exact opposite position or opposite situation to say. Okay, so now the author or Gulliver is being sent for the court. Okay, and what we will find here is that the queen will buy him. Okay, buy him from his master, who is a farmer. And before that, before this, what we find here is that the description of how the exploitation is happening is being described over here. Okay, so as I have told you before also, this chapter shows, the first part of this chapter shows how the powerful people exploit their power, how the powerful people use their power in order to exploit who are dependent on him or her. Okay, who are dependent, though these people are being exploited. Okay, those people are being exploited only because the master, only because these powerful sections of the society are controlling or having the power in their own hands. And it is true for the society, not just the Brobdingnagian society, but also the society of ours. And as I have told you before, that this is a satire. Right, this is a satire of our society, of England, of Europe, of our culture. Okay, so what we find here is that this is being reflected in the first section. What we see? We see that there are frequent labors. Gulliver is saying that he is now made a puppet. Okay, সে একটা পাপেটের পরিণত হয়েছে. He is made into a joker of a circus. Okay, সে যেন একটা সার্কাসের জোকারের মতো, and he is being toured around. তাকে দিয়ে শো করানো হচ্ছে. And what we find here is that this frequent labors throughout the day of so many shows, what it actually led to? It actually led Gulliver to become more weaker in health. Okay, he was reduced almost to a skeleton. But on the other hand, what we find that the master, that the farmer, is becoming more and more insatiable. Okay, he was gaining wealth, right? See the class structure that is being showcased over here. Okay, the class structure shows that the farmer stays at the bottom of the power hierarchy in any society. Okay, farmer does not hold much power in a society, but in the Brobdingnagian society or this place, what we get that this person who is the farmer in the society is holding a power. Okay, or gaining wealth. Why? Because he has a tool, that is Gulliver, which gives him power to exert or gain money. Okay, so as if he is becoming an entrepreneur. Okay, he is becoming a person who is wielding a power over a person who in his own land is much more powerful. Okay, এই যে গালিভার, সে কিন্তু নিজের ল্যান্ডে অনেক বেশি পাওয়ারফুল একটা ফার্মারের থেকে. But in this society, in Brobdingnag, what we find because of his size, because of his lack of power due to his size, what we get that this person is lacking the power. সে তার পাওয়ারটা ল্যাক করছে। সে সোশ্যাল পজিশনে ফার্মার যদি তলায় হয়, where the farmer cannot exert power anything on anyone, he is gaining the power because the person he is using, that is Gulliver, is less powerful than the farmer. Okay, and what we find here is that by like any capitalist society, like any capitalist, what we find? We find that the more they get monetary gains, the more they are habituated, or the more they become greedy. Okay, and it leads to what? It leads to the starvation of the workers. It is true for the factories, it is true for Gulliver also. Okay, he is almost reduced to a skeleton, and the farmer observed that, or understood that, Gulliver would die soon, because he won't be able to take much strain of performing more. So what he decided? He decided that before Gulliver dies, he should be sold off. Okay, he should be given to good hands, so that he could get money out of that also. Okay, he does not have to pay to recover his health better than, and he should, what he should do, he should sell this Gulliver, sell the person, and gain more money out of that. Okay, so his thoughts are alike, and what we find here is that he is carrying him, okay, to the queen, okay, and her ladies, in order to provide a diversion. And what we find here is that Gulliver is falling on his knees, begged the honor of kissing her imperial foot and everything. But the gracious princess held out her little finger towards him, that is Gulliver, after he had sat on the table. Okay, so what we find here is that Gulliver's continued adventures in Brobdingnag serve to illustrate the importance of the physical size. Okay, how important it becomes is being showcased over here, especially in chapter 3. Reduced to a twelfth of the size of the people who surround him, Gulliver finds all his pride and importance withering away. Okay, and this pride and importance is not just related to his power in Lilliput land, okay, or among his works in the Lilliputian society. Okay, he was the most powerful there, but also it shows the pride is also a reflection of the pride of England, or the English people, or the European people, who call themselves the educated, much more civilized, much more developed, much more powerful than the other sections of the society, or other nations, better to say. Okay, so they have this pride. So the pride of Gulliver, which is being reduced over here, is not just the reduction of the pride of a man, but of a community, of a nation, who thinks them to be the all powerful. Okay, they consider themselves all powerful. Right. So what we find here is that this consideration is very important in the perspective that no one is powerful enough to control everyone. Okay, so babaro baba thake jerokom, father also has a father, right? And what we find here is that every powerful person can be turned into the weakest of the weak in some place or the other, and that is what is reflected over here. Okay, so Gulliver, who is a representative of England, who is a representative of the European prowess, who is a representative of European power, the colonial power, the industrial power, everything, the land of civilization and everything. He is being reduced in size, and this reduction in size which is being described over here, যে সে শুধু সাইজে reduced হয়েছে. This reduction of the size is not just physical but metaphorical. Okay, why? Because this metaphorical reduction in size shows the reduction in his power. Okay, reduction in his reason for pride. ঠিক আছে, তার যে অহংকারের পিছনে সেই যে কারণটা সেটাই চলে যাচ্ছে. Okay, among his own people in England, in Europe, he would be an average person. Gulliver would have been an average person. সেটা সাধারণ লোকের মতো হতে পারে. But in the context of the world, he might have the pride of being the colonialist and the powerful people who can control the society, who can control the world or have dominance over the world. But what we find here is that his pride and importance is withering away. সেটা হচ্ছে দূরে সরে যাচ্ছে, সেটা শেষ হয়ে যাচ্ছে. Okay, so without the physical power to back him up, which was there in the land of the Lilliputians, what we find, whether the normal level of the extraordinary level that he experiences in Lilliput, it is impossible for Gulliver to maintain the illusion of his own importance. Okay, why? Because this important or the point of being important or the point of being powerful is all relative. Okay, সেটা relative ব্যাপার. Okay, it depends on the situation, it depends on the person who you are comparing yourself with. Okay, you might be a powerful in comparison to a dog, you might be powerful in comparison to a 7-year-old child, but you are not powerful in comparison to an elephant. Okay, or a wrestler, to say. Okay, so what we find here is that this distinction, this illusion of importance is all in your head, is dependent on the experiences that you gather. ঠিক আছে, if you have not met a person who can defeat you in fight, then you will only consider yourself the all powerful. You will consider yourself a person who cannot be defeated in any kind of battle or anything, right? But if you have faced a more worthy competitor, if you have faced a more powerful person who can what do you say, if you can consider a person, if you face a person who is more powerful than you, then what will happen? You will understand your relative importance. তখন তুমি তোমার ইম্পর্টেন্সটা বুঝবে, তখন তুমি তোমার পাওয়ারটা বুঝবে, রাইট? Until you face a challenge, you will consider yourself to be the supreme power, right? That is what is being projected over here. And more to say, when you have experiences of being the supreme power or a person who cannot be defeated in because of the experience in Lilliput land, what we find here is that it creates an ego, it creates a pride within you. এটা মানুষের মধ্যে হবেই, ঠিক আছে? যে ফর এক্সাম্পল তুই হচ্ছে এই কলেজে হচ্ছে ফার্স্ট হোস, ঠিক আছে, বা এই স্কুলে হচ্ছে ফার্স্ট হোস, right? If you become first over here, I am the first boy, I am the first girl, no one can defeat me. But when you face greater challenges in high schools or in different schools or in different college, okay, if you shift your college, if you take transfer, or even if you after you go to university, you will face greater challenges because there more and more people who will be coming, they will be more and more, what can you say, the best and best of the lot. Okay, so they will be they will produce more competition for you, right? So in their comparison, you might be a dwarf as Gulliver is, or you might be also strong there, but I'm just saying that if you consider that I used to be the first boy, I used to be the first girl, and now I am not getting, and you get into depression, that is not the solution. Okay, you have to remember for yourself that any kind of achievement, any kind of importance that you get is all relative. It depends on the situation. তুমি এখানটা ইম্পর্টেন্স পাচ্ছ বলে যে সব জায়গায় ইম্পর্টেন্স পাবে তার কোনো মানে নেই। Okay, it depends on the situation, it depends on the whole lot of the permutation combination of the situation, the policies, the your own abilities, the exertion of your abilities there, সমস্ত কিছুর উপর নির্ভর করে, right? So similarly, Gulliver, who has considered himself, or who was filled with pride because of his experience in Lilliput, with the Lilliputs in Lilliput land, what we find here is that his pride is being nullified over here, and better to say this pride goes away from his whole system. Okay, so what he is saying now, she asks whether I could be content to live at court. She here means the queen. Okay, so Gulliver bowed down to the board of the table and humbly answered that I was my master's slave, but if I were at my own disposal, I should be proud to devote my life to the Majesty's service. So see the term that I was my master's slave. This section, this phrase is important. Okay, see the transition, how it is happening. Okay, see the transition from being a giant among Lilliputs, he is now becoming a slave. Okay, he was a mediocre person, he is a mediocre person in England. Now he is a slave, his master's slave, and his master is no one powerful in the society of Brobdingnag. His master is a farmer, right? Eta she farmer is slave হয়ে গেছে. So social hierarchy তে what we get that this person who used to be, or who had been the most powerful in Lilliput, because of the change of the place, because of the change of the situation, because of the change of the time, what we get this relative change of importance, we get the relative change of power structure. He is now a slave, and now he will devote himself, or he wishes to devote himself for the Majesty's service. And one more important thing that is described over here is that the next line, the next phrase, but if I were at my own disposal, বলছে যে আমি যদি আমার নিজের চিন্তাধারা এক্সার্ট করতে পারি. So what he says that if he has the right to make his own decision, then he would like to devote himself, or he would be proud to devote his life for the service of the queen and the king. Okay, so the inner meaning shows that he is a slave and he does not have the right to take his own decision, right? সে তো একটা slave, তার নিজের ডিসিশন নেওয়ার কোনো রাইটই নেই. So see the difference. So the difference in comparison to Lilliput, okay, where several conditions were imposed on him and he broke the conditions. Even the king who was there was afraid to put on questions on him, though he did. What we find here is that because even after he being the king, he was a Lilliput, he was smaller in size, right? So what we find here is that how the social structure is very important in considering your importance. You might be important in your family, but you might not be important in your class. তুমি যতটা ইম্পর্টেন্স তোমার পাড়ায় পাও ততটা ইম্পর্টেন্স তোমার ক্লাসে পেতে নাও পারো, right? Similarly, vice versa, you might be important in your school, in your society, in your outside world, but you are not respected in your own locality. হতেই পারে, না হওয়ার কিছু নেই, right? So this is what is being described over here. So let's move on. What we get that the farmer is selling him at a good price, and that is 1,000 pieces of gold, and in reply what we get, this person Gulliver is begging that Glumdalclitch, who had always tended him or taken care of him, should be there at his service. Okay, might be admitted to her into her service and continue to be the nurse and the instructor of Gulliver. Okay, and the queen observed my coldness, and the farmer was gone, and that I owed no obligation to my late master. Okay, obviously he had nothing to repay him because he had paid him enough. Okay, because he had made much from showing Gulliver. Okay, the price he had now sold him for was greater. Okay, so what we find here is that the laborious task which was applied to Gulliver was enough to kill an animal, or it was 10 times his strength. Okay, so what we find here is that at the same time we get to see he is critiquing another part of the society where animals are being treated like this. Okay, as I have told you in the beginning that he was treated like an animal, like a joker in circus, as we do in circuses. Similar treatment is being given to this person, right? So what we find here is that he is also critiquing the human tendency of treating animals. Okay, he also says that if my master had not thought my life in danger, her mastery would not have got so cheap a bargain. So let's move on to from all this. What we get here is that the queen is surprised that so much wit, so much good sense, so much diminutive characteristics is there in an animal. An animal, by animal I mean to say Gulliver. Okay, so much thought process is going into the thinking process of Gulliver is being expressed over here, and Queen is surprised by that. Okay, though he is speaking with defectiveness because of the language barrier, but the wit is coming out. And what we find here is that the queen carried her to the king, and his majesty was a prince of gravity and everything. He is describing all those things. And what we find here is that all these things are happening in the royal court, and that is why this chapter name can be given as Gulliver in the royal court. Okay, the things that are happening. Okay, the king is being described. He is a learned person and everything, and you can read yourself what are being given. Okay, so also the several other descriptions are being provided here. Is that he is saying that I might be an embryo or abortive birth or everything. They are discussing about everything they can discuss. And what we find here is that this classifying of Gulliver into something. Okay, this classifying of Gulliver or trying to find out what made Gulliver to do this is a representation of a society who is inquisitive. Okay, Brobdingnag, who is inquisitive enough to know about the things that are happening. Similarly, what we get to see that Gulliver is describing the palace. Okay, even his place at the palace, and this description can be understood by your own reading. It is not very much complex. The next thing that is important, the next section which is important for you is the fool or the dwarf who was appointed to the queen and the king. The interaction of Gulliver with the dwarf. Okay, so what we find here is that this person, the dwarf, is the most, what can you say, the most powerful holder of getting attention from the king and the queen in respect of what? In respect of amusement. Okay, but here he is facing a competitor who is much more able in another aspect. What is that? The wit. Okay, the intellectual perspective. He is much more superior than the dwarf, and more to say, he is more powerful. He is more powerful in the stature of being the smallest among the dwarfs. Okay, সে তো dwarfের থেকেও ছোট. He is smaller than the dwarf, right? So this actually gives a kind of jealous, or provides a kind of situation which is creating jealousy within the mind of the dwarf. Okay, so let's see what it is over here. Okay, so here it begins. Nothing angered and mortified me so much as the queen's dwarf, who being of the lowest stature that was ever in the country, for I verily think he was not full 30 feet high, okay, became so insolent at seeing a creature so much beneath him. Okay, so as I said you just now, the jealousy, and what we find here is that the person who is of 30 feet high is the lowest person in Brobdingnag, that is the dwarf. 30 feet, can you understand? So 30 feet, it comes to 30 floors. Okay, almost 30 floors. So what we find, not 30 floors, it is 10 to 3 floors, I think 3 floors height, sorry, not 30, 3 floors high, 3 tala baড়ির সমান. Okay, so what we find here is that a person who is the dwarf, who is considered the dwarf, takes pride, or takes him being the dwarf as the most important factor in his life. Okay, he is applied to be the most amusing person. Okay, but he is becoming insolent to find a creature who is so low than him. ওকে, যে যার যেটা রয়েছে সেটাতেই তো হচ্ছে সে সন্তুষ্ট হয়, সেটাতেই তো সে সন্তুষ্ট বলা ঠিক না, সে তাতেই হচ্ছে সেইটাকেই হচ্ছে সে ইউজ করে তার কি বলবো, তার পয়েন্টের জন্যে, বা তার হচ্ছে ইম্পর্টেন্স দেখানোর জন্যে, তাই নয় কি? যার যেটা আছে, যে হচ্ছে যেমনভাবে ব্যাটিং করে, তার সেটাই হচ্ছে ইউজ করে তার ট্রেডমার্ক হিসেবে. But when you find a challenger to that is a quite problematic situation, and it is over here. What we find here is that the dwarf is not very willing to get acquainted with him, but he is at the very mood of taking revenge. Okay, so what we find here is that one day at dinner, this dwarf takes his position of raising this person, Gulliver, to take revenge. Okay, he took Gulliver by the middle as he was sitting down, not thinking any harm, but he let Gulliver drop into a large silver bowl of cream, then ran away as fast as he could. Okay, he fell over the heads and ears, and for Gulliver, he had not been a good swimmer. Okay, and more to say, he was a Lilliput now. Okay, so he was not being, and more to say, he is in a cream. How can he swim? Right. So Glumdalclitch, who was his nurse, came to his rescue, who was at the other end of the room, and the queen was in such fright that she wanted presence of mind to assist Gulliver. But what we find here is that his little nurse, Glumdalclitch, ran to his relief and took him out. And after Gulliver had swallowed some amount of cream, he was put to death and put to bed. And what we find here is that in this way he received no other damage but the loss of a suit of some clothes and everything, which was utterly spoiled and everything. And what we get to see that this person is very malicious. Okay, and he had carried his resentment. Okay, so this dwarf, unable to gain the power that generally accompanies the great physical size, has tried to make a place for himself in the society by capitalizing instead on the distinctive lack of power, okay, that accompanies his size. Okay, so actually what we get to see that the person who is of greater size, a person who is bigger in size, gets to have the power, right? But here the dwarf had worked throughout to use his weakness, to use his defective quality, his physical weakness, and he capitalized that to gain power. Okay, his distinctive quality was to gain power through his weakness. Okay, but when Gulliver enters the court, he challenged the dwarf's distinctiveness of being small, okay, amongst all other giants, right? So, and the dwarf responds aggressively to this. It is all psychological fact. Okay, when you are consolidated in a position through your own distinctive quality, and a person comes in the same vicinity and challenges your distinctiveness, you will obviously get angry. তাই নয় কি? তুমি যখন কোনো কিছু দিয়ে একটা পয়েন্ট তৈরি করেছো, কোনো কিছু দিয়ে তোমার একটা মার্ক তৈরি করেছো, কিন্তু কিছুদিন পর তুমি একটা চ্যালেঞ্জ ফেস করছে অন্য আরেকজনের থেকে, সো হোয়াট ইউ উইল ডু, ইউ উইল অ্যাকচুয়ালি বিকাম angry, right? You will not like that person. The same psychological thing is happening to this in this situation between the dwarf and this Gulliver. Okay, so the politics of those who attempt to achieve power not through physical strength but through their distinctive weakness can be just immoral as the mainstream. Okay, and what we find here is that is being described over here, And what we find here is that this is being continuously done. This is done continuously to show how a person, whether in this society or in Brobdingnag society, they do almost the similar things. And Gulliver is doing what? Gulliver is satirizing those characteristics. He is calling out these characteristics. He is calling out this tradition of producing your power in several ways, okay, or exerting your power in several ways. কত রকম ভাবে হচ্ছে তোমার এই যে পাওয়ার হচ্ছে দেখা যায়, কত রকম ভাবে এই যে পাওয়ারটা হচ্ছে এক্সার্টেড হয় সেটা দেখাচ্ছে। Clear? Understood? So what we get to see here is that this was actually to frighten him. Okay, this was actually to challenge the challenger. The dwarf was challenging, the dwarf was trying to destroy the challenger. But it is quite similar to any person who in any society would do. Right. So this is almost the end of the story. After he has been rescued, his little nurse rescued him. He had swallowed a quart of the cream. He was put to bed. Though he had received no other damage than loss of the suits, which was utterly spoiled, but in return of this insolent behavior, the dwarf was soundly whipped. Okay, and as a further punishment, he was forced to drink up the bowl of cream into which he had thrown Gulliver. Okay, so this is the end of chapter 3, part 2 of Gulliver's Travels. So we will continue in the next class. Okay.